Okay, so this book is from 1888, written by W.D. Stokes. It is called The Vaccine Watchman, and we're going to read it. It starts here on the first page here. It says, the herb for the service of man. Psalms CIV 14. The blood of the people shall be on the watchman's head if he sound not the trumpet. Ezekiel. The Vaccine Watchman. This book is going to show the awful effects of corrupting the blood with 50 different kinds of diseases through vaccinations, providing that the practice of corrupting pure blood with disease to prevent disease is an insult to common sense. The opinion of eminent physicians is that more people die through improper medical treatments than from all other causes. It shows how heavily the public is taxed to support a useless, sinful disease-creating practice, namely vaccination. It gives a remedy which has never failed to cure smallpox, and testimonials of wonderful cures effected. It says names of doctors who failed to cure, if required, from W.D. Stokes, medical botanist, 35 Calverley Road, Turnbridge Wells, Kent. I don't know if we'll get through all of this today, but we'll see. We'll get as far as we can. The index to the Watchman, the Vaccine Watchman. We're just going to go down and just start reading. I will put the link to this in the description box below. So if you want to go read it on your own. Okay, it says, a solemn warning to the public. Dear reader, by reading the whole of this, it might be the means of saving your money and life. Beware of the doctors that profess to be a blessing to suffering humanity. These lines can only show the reader a few of the wicked devices and snares to deceive rich and poor, and show up a little of the crime and fraud carried on under a cloak of deception to make gain. Space will not permit me to give many names and addresses or all the figures from the statistics, but I give sufficient to prove my alarming but truthful statements. Were I to use the names of the following surgeons and physicians to a false statement, it would be a libel. But thousands of medical men can prove this statement and the facts stated in a book which I have written entitled Truth versus Error, or the Fallacies of the Medical Faculty Exposed. It is the opinion of thousands of honest doctors that tens of thousands of people are murdered in England every year, and the constitutions of millions injured by poisonous minerals being used in medicine and in the adulteration of food and drinks, and by that unreasonable, unscientific, useless, filthy, blood poisoning practice of vaccination. Who but a madman or an unscientific natural fool would think of taking matter that had passed through millions of diseased and filthy people and putting it into pure blood to prevent disease, which can only corrupt the blood with a complication of diseases? It can be proved by 20,000 doctors and the statistics that vaccination, either from the animal or human blood, is no preventative for smallpox. but it corrupts the blood with consumption and about 50 internal and external diseases. Read the following. It is only a hint at the villainy carried on, and you will not wonder at John Mason Good, MD, FRS, saying that the science of medicine is a barbarous jargon. And the effects of our medicines on the human system are in the highest degree uncertain, except indeed that they have destroyed more lives than war, pestilence, and famine combined. Dr. Frank says that thousands are annually slaughtered in this quiet, sick room. Government should at once either banish medical men and prescribe their blundering art, or they should adopt some better means to protect the lives of the people than at present prevail. When they look far less after the practice of this dangerous profession and the murders committed in it than after the lowest trades. These are the opinions of two eminent physicians, but I could publish the names of 1,000 doctors who are of the same opinion. Now for a most important question, vaccination, which concerns everyone. Even those that have no children and do not believe in vaccination are heavily taxed to support this arbitrary, useless, disease-creating law. I will now show the value of this beautiful so-called preventative from smallpox, which our English government paid, looks like 30,000 pounds for nearly 90 years ago. The cruel, unjust monster, Dr. Jenner, introduced this filthy, murderous scheme to make trade for the doctors who labored to get the inventor of the so-called protection against smallpox. This 30,000 pounds, but before he really got the money for this wonderful discovery, many doctors proved that this cowpox vaccination was no preventative against smallpox. But like the blood poisoning vaccinator of the present time, this imposter had friends in court or in parliament who got him the grant for the money. Dr. Jenner had only just received the 30,000 pounds when he was obliged to confess to his medical brethren and others that vaccination from the cow was of no use. But he said that matter was taken from the greasy heeled horse was a preventative from smallpox. He used it and served it out to other doctors. Dr. Collins and many other physicians have proved that this horrible, stinking, filthy disease of grease in the horse's heel is always caused by the horse being consumptive. A great many doctors say that the cowpox, smallpox, the grease, and consumption is all one kind of disease. This accounts for so much smallpox panic after so much vaccination and so many dying in consumption. Dr. Nittinger says, out of 100 smallpox patients before vaccination, from 5 to 7 died, but after, from 10 to 20 died. This might be easily accounted for, the stream of corruption having passed through millions and taken up all kinds of disease. When put into pure blood, it must sow the seed for a complication of diseases. This weakens the body and lowers the vitality, so that when smallpox takes the half-murdered victim, there is not the strength to throw off such a complication of diseases, which is 50 times worse than smallpox alone. This accounts for smallpox being more fatal in the vaccinated than what it is in the unvaccinated, as shown above. There have been a lot of murderous villains who cared not what they did to make money. They took smallpox matter from their patients, inoculated the cows, calves, and heifers, and after they had given the animals the smallpox, they took the matter from the animal, which was likely to be compounded with syphilis, leprosy, eczema, and other diseases that had passed through millions of filthy people, and put it back into human blood again. And by doing so, those wholesale murderers have at different times caused fearful outbreaks of smallpox. But those villains professed that after the smallpox matter had passed through the cow, that it would prevent smallpox when put back into the human blood, where they took it from. To say that it will prevent smallpox is a lie to cover their villainy. That which we sow, we must reap. The villains did this to keep up their money-making practice of vaccination, which brings in the doctors millions of pounds every year. Smallpox, when taken in a natural way by infection, cannot be so dangerous as when inoculated into the body by vaccination, which is inoculation. Some honest physicians who were public vaccinators have given up the practice with disgust and are now spending time and money to make known the awful effects of vaccinations. Many found that it caused smallpox, consumption, and other diseases, which resulted in death. Dr. Collins writes as follows: a lady had herself vaccinated. It produced the worst form of smallpox, which proved fatal. Dr. Collins vaccinated a child. A few days after, the child was taken with smallpox and died. The same physician says that there were 8 children vaccinated, and soon after the vaccination, smallpox appeared. And on the 9th day of the disease, with one exception, all had died. These are his own words. I have met with many similar cases during certain epidemic outbreaks of the smallpox, especially when I have inoculated with fresh lymph from the cow, which, by the way, is obtained by first passing the smallpox virus through the body of the animal and is then said to possess the power of rendering the human body unsusceptible to smallpox contagion, but which in reality is often the means of giving the disease it is supposed to prevent. Dr. Collins, MD, MRCS, England. This is a murderous practice, philosophically viewed, one not only unnatural and disgusting, but an insult to common sense. WDS. Many physicians say that the filthy practice of inoculating cows with smallpox is carried on in other countries to keep up this money-making business. It looks very much like it. For in Germany, the vaccinating law is strictly enforced. The child is vaccinated in infancy, vaccinated at school age, vaccinated again in case of epidemic, sorry guys, my computer is slow. Okay, let me see. Vaccinated again in case of epidemic or an outbreak of smallpox. And the males are vaccinated again on joining the army. See, in spite of this flimsy barricade of double and triple vaccination, 1 million of Germans were struck with smallpox. At one outbreak, with a most fearful mortality, for 200,000 of those so-called protected people died with smallpox after being vaccinated 3, 4, and some 5 times. In London, the Metropolitan Asylums Board record in their report the admission of 36,000 vaccinated smallpox cases, and these constitute 36,000 failures. I wonder what will induce the vaccinators to condemn this murderous practice. If these statistics will not do it, take away the millions of pounds that the public is taxed to pay and hold the doctors responsible for the ill effects of vaccination, and it would be instantly swept away in disgust. Dr. Playfair said in Parliament that another parliamentary screw, he meant a more compulsory law for vaccinating, would sweep smallpox off the earth. How is it that it does not do it in Germany, where all are vaccinated and revaccinated and trebly vaccinated? How can he prove it to be preventative, seeing that soldiers and sailors who are all vaccinated and revaccinated die of smallpox? If any anti-vaccinating member were to bring the above and the following figures before him, it would prove him to be a man speaking against his own conscience. And by so doing, he is upholding robbery and murder. On the committee that the government appointed to inquire into the effects of vaccination, they were nearly all interested vaccinators making a rich harvest by vaccination. What kind of a report could they expect? Now hear the words of their leader, who was sent to the government by the interested vaccinators. Dr. Playfair said these words in Parliament: "We may reasonably assume that those who make gain by the practice are clamorous for its continued enforcement, because they feel it could not maintain itself by the evidence of its efficacy or efficiency." Dr. Playfair has spoken a few words of truth, for vaccination can never recommend itself, and it is those that are receiving millions of pounds for poisoning the blood that are sending in the false reports to deceive the government. A committee of vaccinators sent in a report to the government with words to this effect: that none need fear injuring the health with vaccination, and there need be no fear of communicating diseases. The statistics on this paper prove them to be barefaced, willful liars, upholding a murderous law and a filthy, sinful, disgusting practice for gain. And all these vile, cruel monsters consider themselves gentlemen, and they are treated as such by the public. Dr. Playfair and the committee, Dr. Dilk and others for gain, shut their eyes against the awful effects of vaccination. They all know that it is only a sham protection, creating disease and killing tens of thousands every year, because smallpox was not so bad when the committee sat. And just now, those interested vaccinators want to say that vaccination has been the cause of it. Cholera is not so bad as it used to be, but vaccination has not kept it away. I have shown above how smallpox follows vaccination, and the following figures, which are facts, will show how it causes smallpox and many other diseases. I now ask the vaccinators this question: how is it that smallpox follows double and triple vaccination? How is it that the death rate for smallpox went up by 20 and 50% when the population only gained 7%? Let the anti-vaccinating members in Parliament bring those statistics and make the blood poisoners prove in a scientific way how a corruption that has passed through millions of filthy people can prevent disease. Demand an answer, and the blood poisoners will be defeated. Notice what follows vaccination. At Blackburn, the government report for March shows that in 1875, there had been awarded over and above the fees to the public vaccinators of £185 for successful vaccination. The above figures do not prove it successful. Now look at it in the next year, 1876, with 3 streets blockaded. So great was smallpox raging, they only reaped what they had sown. Is not this sufficient to prove that vaccination is no preventative? Is the government going to be such dupes to be deceived another 80 years? Or do they want the opinion of another interested vaccinating committee? Are they going to give vaccination a trial for another 80 years to prove whether it is a preventative, when 90 out of every 100 of the smallpox patients, according to the return from the London Smallpox Hospital, have been vaccinated? Can any honest, sensible man have any faith in vaccination after reading this page of facts? In Manchester, the public vaccinator received £367 over his fees for perfect vaccination. In Salford, £235 over their fees. The result was the same, a smallpox panic. Look at Birmingham from 1870 to 1874, receiving £893 over their fees, and it was declared the best vaccinated town in the kingdom. Yet in the same year, 1874, there were 3,763 cases of smallpox. 3,367 were vaccinated and revaccinated. There were in Birmingham altogether from 1871 to 1874, 7,706 cases of smallpox. 6,795 had been vaccinated, and there were 1,270 deaths. Is this a preventative? One of the members said in the House of Parliament that vaccination had stamped out smallpox in Ireland. Soon after, there was a fearful epidemic and fearful mortality. Out of every 100 deaths, 37 were of children under 5 years of age. On Her Majesty's ship, Octavia, where all were vaccinated, and about 99 out of every 100 being revaccinated, there were 175 cases and many deaths, including the first lieutenant. Sir T. Chambers said in the House of Commons, 1871, that Prussia was the best vaccinated country in Europe. Yet in Berlin, 3 times as many died of smallpox as in London. And in another account, 8 times as many. Now to you that believe in vaccination, do you feel you are safe under its protection? Now for a little more decided proof that vaccination is no good, only to make trade for the doctors. Let Dr. Playfair and Dr. Dilkey and all those blood poisoners that say vaccination is a preventative or that it mitigates the disease. Look at Germany, the Army, the Navy, and Mr. Muller's orphanage, and 1,000 other institutions where all have been doubly and triply vaccinated. Smallpox has been worse than, smallpox has been worse there than where there has been no vaccination. In Mr. Muller's orphanage, where all were vaccinated and about 95 out of every 100 revaccinated, there were 293 cases, 18 deaths. In the Army and the Navy, where vaccination is enforced and everyone who enlists has to be vaccinated, and about 95 cases out of every 100 are revaccinated. The mortality amongst these is higher than what it is amongst the civil population. These figures from the statistics and the above experience of Dr. Collins proves vaccination useless, only to create smallpox and a train of other diseases. I give figures which will prove that smallpox has been 5 times worse since the Compulsory Vaccination Act was passed than what it was before. Those villains that practice vaccination know this to be true, and this has to be taken into consideration. Before the vaccination law, about 1/3 part of the people or more carried out that foolish law made by our Royal College of Physicians and the government to inoculate for smallpox. This foolish, murderous law was made, for they thought people would get smallpox easier by inoculation than what they would if taken in a natural way or by infection. Those unwise generals did not calculate that the inoculated persons would infect others, which they did, and thousands died through inoculation and infection from it. And as those that have had smallpox seldom get it the second time, the Royal College of Surgeons and Physicians labored under this delusion to think if all people were inoculated for smallpox, that there would be no more people to take the disease. And in this unreasonable way, they thought to stamp out the disease, forgetting that the millions coming into the world would be diseased by the inoculated victims. The government nor the physicians in those days, or at the present time, had not the good sense to see that they were taking humors that had passed through millions of diseased and filthy people, which would be spreading all kinds of disease, when they made a law to inoculate for smallpox and opened King's College Hospital for that purpose. Common sense ought to show anyone that smallpox could not be so bad now as when they used to give smallpox through inoculation. The interested vaccinators say that vaccination is the cause of it. It is false. When they were about to repeal the murderous law of inoculation, which caused 1 out of every 14 of the population to die of smallpox, the interested inoculators, like the interested vaccinators, now were against the law being altered to stop the foolish, murderous practice of inoculation. If vaccination were not inoculation in disguise, how could smallpox get worse after they repealed the law of inoculation? The following figures, which are the true statistics, will prove my statement. The first epidemic in 1857, 58, and 59, there were 14,244 deaths. The second epidemic, 1863, 64, and 65, 20,059 deaths. Third epidemic, 1870, 71, and 72, 44,840 deaths. Increase of population from the first to the second epidemic, 7%. Increase of smallpox in the same period, nearly 50%. Increase of the population from the second to the third epidemic was 10%. And the increase of smallpox in the same period, 120%. Deaths from smallpox in that first 10 years after the enforcement of vaccination, 1854 to 1863, 33,515 deaths. In the second 10 years, 1864 to 1873, 70,458 deaths. Does not this prove that smallpox increased with vaccination? Yes, and so do the taxes come heavy on the public to support this useless, disease-creating practice, which is only another name for inoculation. Prior to the passing of the compulsory vaccination law, one smallpox hospital was sufficient for the whole of London. Now there are 6. The return of the London smallpox hospitals shows that over 90% of the patients there find where I was. The return of the London smallpox hospitals shows that over 90% of the patients there have been vaccinated. This ought to be sufficient to convince anyone with reason or common sense that vaccination is useless, only to create disease. There are 2 classes of people who cannot see the truth. First, those who are prejudiced and unbelieving and will not come to the light to read for themselves. And secondly, those interested vaccinators who are making millions of pounds by the vile practice. I will show some of the ill effects of vaccination and prove the Royal Committee of Inquiry to be liars, deceiving the government by saying that vaccination would not injure the health nor communicate disease. It appears that 430 deaths and over 2,000 cases of injury are reported by the signatures to the census papers, which they allege of their own experience to be due to vaccination. All these witnesses are responsible householders, and there are also 290 deaths on the Registrar General's report as due to official vaccination. It would be tens of thousands if thousands of those interested vaccinators were not doing the same as the following: writing lies on the death certificate to keep up vaccination, which brings in millions of pounds. Now, for a doctor's own words, a death from vaccination occurred not long ago in my practice. And although I had not vaccinated the child, yet in my desire to preserve vaccination from reproach, I omitted all mention of it from my certificate of death. Mr. Henry May, MRCS, Birmingham, Medical Review, 1874. I could get the names of 1,000 vaccinating doctors that have done this to keep up that money-making murderous practice of vaccination. I have the names of about 1,000 that have been tortured and died in a dreadful state through vaccination, and the names of tens of thousands that have been murdered by vaccination could be published. I hope those who have the means and love in their heart for suffering humanity will yet publish the awful effects of this murderous law, more than what I can show here. Thousands die with internal diseases years after vaccination, and no one knows the cause of their suffering and their death. Millions have had their constitutions ruined. If there is one member of Parliament who does not know the awful effects of vaccination, He ought to know it and do his duty to the public and try to do away with an arbitrary law that permits a lot of unfeeling hearted doctors to commit wholesale robbery and murder by corrupting the pure blood with a complication of diseases for which the public has to pay millions of pounds. There is no business transacted in the House of Commons or Lords of so much importance as the question of vaccination, for every householder is taxed to pay the vaccinators, to put poisonous humors into pure blood that have passed through millions of diseased and filthy people. And after poor working men have deprived themselves of the common necessaries of life to pay 20 or 30 fines to keep their children from being tortured to death with vaccination. Some have at least been cast into prison, their goods sold, their wives and children turned out into the streets and thrown on the parish for support. This law caused one poor woman to murder herself, body and soul. To put herself, as she thought, out of a miserable existence. That member of parliament who will uphold this blood poisoning, sinful, filthy practice ought not to be one of the lawmakers. 15 female scholars were syphilized by a vaccination from a child whose skin was perfectly clear. Dr. Lotz has collected 50 separate cases affecting in all 750 individuals with filthy diseases. All this might arise from one apparently healthy child or from a cow or a calf that has been vaccinated and poisoned from human blood. In 1882, a committee of 15 vaccinators met at the council chamber, Exeter Hall, and instituted a medical inquiry into some important features of the question. There were 7 questions asked. The answers to the third question, viz, what diseases have you known to be occasioned or intensified by vaccination, which are too important, however, to be suppressed? 242 medical witnesses, almost all vaccinators, testified to the following diseases within their own experience caused by vaccination. Abdominal pathesis. Okay, some of these words I'm going to completely butcher. And angioloensitis, blindness, boils, bronchitis, bullae, cancer, cellulitis, convulsions, diarrhea, dyscrasia, eczema, erysipelas, erythema, gangrenosa, general debility, herpes, impetigo, inflammation, intensified ulceration, lichen, marasmus, meningitis, paralysis, phagedemic action, pityriasis, pneumonia, prurigo, pyemia, pyrexia, rickets, syphilis, scald head, scarlatina, scrofula, septicemia, skin diseases, struma, tuberculosis, varicocele. I can prove that there are many other diseases inoculated into the blood by vaccination. There are over 10,000 doctors who consider vaccination useless only to create diseases, and they are from long experience of the same opinion as myself that vaccination causes the death of 50,000 persons in England every year, and it never saved the life of one single individual. The first royal committee named in this pamphlet made it appear hold on. Phoenix, are you up, Bubby? That was weird. Thought it was my cat, but he's over here. The first royal committee named in this pamphlet made it appear to the government that vaccination was harmless and a preventative from smallpox. I don't know what that is, guys, but it sounds like somebody jumping down off of something. That's really weird. Okay, now I lost where I was. Um, let's see, we've been on here already for almost an hour. So I will come back and read this a little while later. Might be tonight, and read some more. This has been only for educational purposes. Educational purposes only. I am not a doctor. I'm only reading this book that was published, or pamphlet, and from 1888. Okay, I will be back on here later. Thank you.